This morning, we will talk about data gathering process about quantitative methods. Okay, so with the lecture that I will give this morning, naka-incorporate na dito yung ating refresher lecture with the the topic assigned for week 1. So in our part 1 sa RTW1, it's part in our chapter 3, meron tayo doong research design and meron tayo doong data collection process. So our research design will determine or will influence what is the type of data that you will gather or we will gather in our research. Now, if we will use descriptive data, we can choose either we collect a quantitative data or qualitative data. And for this morning, we will go back to how, in details, how to do data gathering process. Okay, because that's the thing that's the major procedure that you will do for this semester. Okay. So quantitative data, just to remind us, is everything about figures and numbers, okay? From the word quantify. So it talks about numbers and figures and charts. So later on in your chapter 4, if you will have a research design on quantitative, you will have figures and numbers in your presentation of data. So quantitative data gathering tends to quantify attributes, attitudes, behaviors, and other defined variables with a motive to either back up, it will support, or it will oppose the hypothesis of a specific phenomenon or your hypothesis in the study. So it quantifies by contextualizing the data obtained. Yung mismong raw data ninyo will be contextualized. It was obtained, diba, from via survey or interview of the study. Then it will be contextualized according to your research topic. So that is quantitative data. Now, these are the methods useful for quantitative data collection. First and foremost, a data that can be counted or expressed in numericals constitute is the quantitative data. So you have to use a method that would have an answer in numbers. It is collected through a structured questionnaire. So quantitative data is quantification. The attribute is to measure. That's why you need to have a research instrument that is structured. Asking questions starting with how much or how many is an attribute of a quantitative data collection. So it represents both definite and objective data. In your research instrument, if you are going to collect quantitative data, try to evaluate it if the questions you have asked or the questions that you will going to ask your respondents will represent definitive and objective data or definitive and objective results. Furthermore, quantitative information is much sorted for statistical and mathematical analysis, making it possible to illustrate it in the form of charts and graphs. So as mentioned in our lecture in chapter 3, quantitative data will employ statistical treatment. So you can use mean, you can use standard deviation, percentage, frequency distribution under our descriptive analysis. But if you have hypotheses, that's the time that you will use inferential type of statistical method, which, for example, we can have test for difference, like we can employ analysis of variance, or test for relationship, we can employ person-R correlation. So in our data gathering for quantitative method, we have two types. We have the survey design and we have the experimental design. So let's define first surveys and experiments. So survey design, it will help researchers answer three types of questions. The first one is descriptive questions. So what are the type of descriptive questions? Of course, it tends to ask the respondent to describe something in their practice or in their surrounding. An example is, what percentage of practicing nurses support hospital abortion services? So that's a type of descriptive questioning. The second type of question in survey design is on relationships between variables. So I believe this is present in some or majority of the studies to test for relationship between variables. An example for the question for test of relationship: is there a positive association between endorsement of abortion services and support for implementing hospice care? So that is a test for relationship. Letter C, or the third type of questions in survey design, is about predictive relationships between variables, but with the essence of time. So does time one, with the endorsement of support for hospital abortion services, predict greater on the time two of burnout in nurses? So there is the essence of time. But all of these are being answered by a survey questionnaire, and they tend to describe something. Where on the other hand, the experimental design, it is systematically manipulating one or more variable in order to evaluate how this manipulation impacts an outcome of interest. Okay. Importantly, an experiment isolates the effects of this manipulation by holding all other variables constant. So just like in our experimental design using animals, we will manipulate the dose, and then our animals will be the variable that should be and uniform and constant. So when one group receives a treatment, the other group does not. So that is the manipulated variable of interest. The experimenter can isolate whether the treatment and not other factors influence the outcome. So in our phase right now, we limit ourselves from doing experimental design because manipulation of variables requires physical um, physical use of equipments, and we need to transport some things, and we need, in other words, the logistics for experimental design is very difficult in this point of time, and students are not really encouraged to go out of their homes for safety reasons. Moving forward, as we begin our chapter, or as we begin the second phase of our research writing, we are now in our instrumentation. So instrumentation is applicable both for survey design and experimental design. But today's lecture, I contextualize instrumentation according to our survey design in data gathering of quantitative method. So how to do the instrumentation? To check your instruments, you can open your research instruments right now and evaluate it at hand if these are present in your instrument. So the name of the survey instrument must be visible. So it has to represent the data that will be collected. Discuss whether you use an instrument designed for this research, or you will modify instrument, or you will just adapt an instrument. So again, you can do adopted questionnaire and adapted questionnaire. But even though you need to follow, or you need to check for this following attributes of an instrument. The first attribute is to check for the validity of scores using the instrument. If the respondents were able to answer your instruments or the questionnaire, how would you know that the scores that you have in return are valid or acceptable. So these are the things that you need to check for your validity, or your validators hopefully can check this one. The first type is the content validity. So content validity will answer the question, do the items measure the content they were intended to measure? So by doing so, you have to go back to your statement of the problem. In the statement of the problem, you have emphasized there in detail the problem or the objective that you want to answer. All of these written in your statement of the problem must be present in your instrument, must be represented by a question and a way to measure it. That is how you do content validity. The second one is predictive or concurrent validity. So the question on this is, do scores predict a criterion measure? Yung scores that the respondents will give you can well represent your variable that being measured in the statement of the problem or in the conceptual framework. Another question is, do results correlate with other results? Are they not far out from each other, or are the results not odd from each other? So that is about concurrent validity, the connectiveness of your results from the variable that being measured and to the other results also. The third validity of score is on construct validity. So a question on this is about, do items measure hypothetical constructs or concepts? So you have to look at your questionnaire if it is capable of measuring your constructs or concepts that's presented in your conceptual framework. In more recent studies, construct validity has become the overriding objective in validity, and it has focused on whether the scores serve a useful purpose and have positive consequences when they are used in practice. So in your cover letter, you can request your validator in detail that he or she can do validity of scores or do some content predictive or construct validity in your instrument to make sure that the scores that you will get from the instrument that you have made are reliable.